Hey, welcome back to episode 5 of M&A 101, where we're just talking about high level some of the terminology that we're dealing with as we either read about some deals in the news or are trying to buy or sell a business of our own. So this episode is going to be about the timing, I guess, the order in which a transaction will occur. And this is, I give this caveat every single time I've done this, an oversimplification, and this is just one example of how a deal might unfold, and this is generally more a private transaction. We'll talk a little bit more about alternative deals like IPOs and things like that later on, but let's say that you want to go and sell your business. So you are out there shopping the business. You're out there trying to find prospective buyers, maybe use a business broker, whatever it is. Eventually you have some interested parties. Typically, you're going to start with an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, a confidentiality agreement. This is something that basically says, hey, we're going to give you some information and it's private. You can't turn around and give that to our competitor. Use it against us. That's against the rules. We'll sue you if you do that. That NDA is basically just a way to say, hey, let's keep this between us and have that in writing. After the NDA is in place, that's when you'll give some of that preliminary information. It'll be early negotiations. It's more a sales aspect than anything else. This is where you are trying to convey the value of your business. And once you've successfully done that with one or more potential buyers, eventually you're going to get to where they're going to make an offer. One somewhat less commonly method of doing that is what's called an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding. An MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, is typically something that's not really a signed document. It's just one company sending a letter to another saying, hey, this is our plan. And maybe it's a precursor to something more formal coming later, but it's just a way to put something more formally on paper about what you think a deal should look like. But getting more formal than that still, maybe it comes after an MOU, or maybe you skip straight to this, is going to be a term sheet. And another term for a term sheet is an LOI, a letter of intent. There probably is some subtle nuance, and this is probably something where you could ask two people and they would say each one means the opposite. But in my mind, an LOI and a term sheet are basically the same thing. That's the agreement that says we plan to buy you, your asset, your shares, whatever it is, for this number of dollars. And obviously it's typically going to be a little bit more complex than that. But that is the structure, the framework of the deal. This is our plan. If you're going to buy a house, when you make an offer, you're providing the letter of intent. You're saying that we are offering you whatever amount of money for this house of yours. We still have to go through all the process, the home inspection, all that sort of stuff. But this is our plan. That typically means you're entering an exclusivity period. When you make the offer on the home, typically the seller isn't going to be negotiating with someone else. There might be other offers that come in, immediately after yours. But once they've accepted your offer and gone into that period after that, it tends to be exclusive. And it's similar in business. You're going to be in that exclusivity period for a certain amount of time where you or the buyer, whoever the buyer is able to conduct their due diligence. And so that's really the next big phase, is the diligence phase. Due diligence can mean a lot of things, and it's easy to segment those into, we'll say, the most common types of diligence. And I'll try to do that here. There's a lot of overlap, but at a high level, due diligence just means you're investigating the business to make sure it is what you think it is. So you'll probably start with financial due diligence. During the negotiations, the business said they're doing $10 million a year in revenue. The financial due diligence now is your opportunity to actually look at the books. You get to look at the financial statements. You get to look at their accounting practices. Maybe this is a smaller business that doesn't necessarily follow GAAP principles, GAAP generally accepted accounting principles. I know as a founder myself, starting a small business, I'm not an accountant. There isn't necessarily one hard and fast way to necessarily do things correctly in accounting, but there is a generally acceptable, mostly understood as correct way. And I would say that as a founder, I was 98% of the way there, because I would always be Googling it, trying to figure out the right way. But because I wasn't an accountant, I wouldn't put a stamp on it and say, yeah, these books can be audited and they'll be unimpeachably following GAAP principles. But that's how it's often going to be when you're dealing with smaller businesses. You want to make sure that when you look at the books, things are in order. If they say they're doing $10 million a year, you can look at the financials, you can look at the balance sheet, you can understand if that's actually the case, how much money they have, how much money they're bringing in, how much money is going out, what they're projecting into the future, etc. It's all going to be part of the financial due diligence. From there, related, obviously all this very related, is going to be the legal due diligence. You're going to look at contracts that they might have, liabilities they might have. If there's a lawsuit, whether they're the plaintiff or the defendant, if they have intellectual property, that they're up on their taxes, also closely tied in with financial due diligence. You're just making sure that you're aware of what you need to be aware of. If there is a lawsuit, if they're being sued for whatever amount of money for whatever it is they did, you're going in eyes wide open. If you're the buyer, when you made an offer, maybe you are unaware of the lawsuit, maybe you're going to have to amend your offer because there is that 50% chance they're going to lose a $5 million lawsuit, and so you're saying they're worth $2.5 million less. Then you get into something like operational due diligence. This is really such a blanket term. It's everything that they're doing day to day. You're going to look at the org chart. You're going to look at the sales pipeline. You're going to look at the service delivery. If they're an MSP, you're going to look at how they're actually delivering that service. Do they have a triage team, a dispatch team, level 1, 2, 3 techs? Do they have guys that go in the field? Are they all remote? Et cetera, and so forth. Everything that they're doing. If it's a manufacturer, you're going to look at their manufacturing process. You're going to try to understand everything about that process. If there's any intellectual property involved, if there's that one key point where everything about their process hinges on this one guy, and that one guy knows how to do all these very arcane things, and hey, he's getting a little old and he might retire soon. When you're going through the operational due diligence, you're trying to really understand all the nuance like that. Then you'll get into customer due diligence. I mentioned looking at contracts and looking at customers and sales pipeline. You might want to look at existing customers and see what those contracts are. Maybe this business only operates on month-to-month contracts. Maybe some of those customers are locked in for a year or 3 years. You're going to want to understand what you're committing to buying this company, because you're going to have to honor those contracts. Similarly with vendors, what contracts has the company signed for what they will be buying? Are they locked in for a year, 3 years? Is there going to be limited ability to cut costs, because most of the costs, maybe they're on some very expensive lease for the building they're in that it goes for another 10 years. You're going to want, I guess I started this about customer deals, so that wouldn't exactly be a customer deal, but you want to understand everything about the customers and the contracts involved there, and any customer data around there, customer performance data, et cetera, as part of the customer due diligence. You'll get into HR due diligence, also close with operations. This is all a lot of overlap, but there's probably some key players. There's probably that sales guy where if he leaves, is he going to take a lot of the business with him? Is there that one guy who is the only one who knows how to execute these different processes? Are those people tied to the business? Are they on any sort of contract where they're locked in for a certain amount of time? How much will the business suffer if they leave? How much would they suffer if they leave? Like how easy will it be for them to just walk away if they just don't like new management, if they think this is their opportunity to leave? And then I guess the last I'll mention is IT due diligence. If you're an MSP, then this is probably closely tied to operational due diligence. But if you're some sort of enterprise business, if you're an insurance company, then maybe it's going to be pretty important to look at your infrastructure, your cybersecurity policies and implementations. You'll want to look at all the digital assets. You want to understand everything that's not necessarily tangible, although obviously in IT you're looking often at servers and such, but everything about how the company is able to continue operating from the perspective of having the lights on, the machines running, and all of the systems connected together with one another. All goes well, you're going to proceed after due diligence. But in the event where something doesn't go well, sometimes that's where the deal falls through. Sometimes a deal in LOI might have a breakup fee built in. I think this happened recently where it was Adobe was trying to purchase Canva. It was a $20 billion deal, and I think the market went south a little bit after that. But then the federal regulators looked at the deal, and it became a little bit difficult to get through the diligence process, where ultimately Adobe said, this is just getting too hard and this acquisition would be too costly. I think the regulator said that it was a little bit too monopolistic, and it was just too daunting of a task to try to get it over the finish line. And the poor folks at Canva, I think, got $1 billion as the breakup fee. They didn't sell anything, no stock, no equity issued to Adobe. There was not an asset that changed hands. Canva, just for going through all of the effort of opening the kimono, showing their books, got $1 billion breakup fee. I think a lot of them probably would have preferred that they actually did close the deal, get to the next stage, which would have been the purchase agreement. Or the closing of the deal. The purchase agreement is that now that you've made it through the LOI, now that you put that structure in place, you built the frame of the house, I guess, with the LOI, now you're actually putting all the specifics on there. You have this great framing done, but this window is supposed to be a bay window, and you're going to have the whole home wired a certain way with Ethernet cables. That's all the detail, all the nuance, all the things that go into it. Sometimes when there's a buyer gets certain rights or certain protections, all that's going to be documented in the purchase agreement, where once you've worked out all the specific language about how the deal is going to be transacted, you can finally get to the closing, exchange the money, the stock, whatever it is, and then finally you pop the champagne, you can celebrate. You're all done after all the closing. So it's a complicated process, a very simple, straightforward business. It's still going to take a little bit of time because you want to make sure you have your bases covered legally and financially. And it can be a process that drags on for years. I think the Adobe Canva situation went on for 18 months before the breakup occurred. The exclusivity period that's written into the LOI, can be anywhere from a month, 3 months, to a year, 2 years. So this process is as long or short as it needs to be. But it really is, whether you're the buyer or the seller, the best chance to demonstrate your value or understand the value of what you're buying, and make sure that when that deal finally closes, everyone's on the same page and knows what they're getting. So that's it for episode 5 of our M&A 101. Let's come back next time to talk more about some alternative sorts of deals. I'll mention things like IPOs, and let's talk about some of the financing. I mentioned debt with the leveraged buyout. I'll get a little bit more about where exactly the money's coming from, how this all works. So stay tuned, and we'll see you there. Thank you.